people who all share one thing, and that is we all have a great love for Victor Garcia and miss him greatly. So I wanted to give you a little overview of what we're going to be doing this morning. We're going to have lots of time for discussion and questions and telling stories. The session will be videotaped. Victor's wife, Laura Gonzalez, who is here today, has arranged for this to be videoed, so there will be essentially a memorialization of all of our reminiscences about Victor, which I think will be very, very special. If you're sitting in the audience and you do not wish to be videotaped, maybe if you sat sort of on that side of the room, then you'd be out of the camera range. As I understand, not everybody feels like they want to be, not everybody wants to be a movie star. So Laura will not be speaking, even though she's listed in the program as the first speaker. And the first speaker in the second half of the session, Jessica Lott, had a family emergency and she's not able to be here this morning either. So that gives us lots of time to have, as I say, conversation and storytelling. We will be adding one additional speaker. The beginning of the second session will be opened by Dr. Steve Hoven, who is the dean of the college where Victor spent his career at Indiana University of Pennsylvania. And the third presentation in the first half of the morning is co-authored by Karina Heckert and Alex Heckert. And Alex's name was omitted from the program, unfortunately. But he's here. Will you two be able to come up to the podium together? Because I think his camera is...
We can do it here or up there.
Which, will you be able to... Okay, that's fine. And I would like to ask you to make sure your phones are silenced so that we don't have any wayward ringing recorded. And then most importantly, I wanted to tell you that part of the reason we're doing this is that not only is a testimony of our love for Victor and a way to recognize his many accomplishments through his career, but we also, Laura and Steve Hoven and friends at Indiana University of Pennsylvania have started a memorial fund that will carry on Victor's work. So we have a flyer here with information about this memorial fund and a QR code. If any of you are inclined to make a donation to this in Victor's memory, we would very much welcome that. And I'll make sure that we stop a couple times and pass these around. So make sure we get one to everybody while you're here today. Okay, I guess that's all the housekeeping that we need to take care of. So without any further ado, our first speaker is going to be Edward Gondolf, and his title is Victor Garcia, Living Applied Anthropology.
I'm going to sit here, is that okay?
That's fine.
Well, it's so great to be with you all and share this special time of remembrance of Victor, but also, you know, just exploring the many dimensions of his life that go beyond probably our individual contacts. It's a great also prompting of us for us to think about our own lives and the full and many dimensions and facets that we have as we have.
Hello. Pay attention.
Yeah, you know, it helps us look at our own lives in a fuller way, I think, as well. But probably the most important thing I can say this morning is, Laura, how much we love you and embrace you. And I hope you can feel that love and support and care being here, but beyond this too. Laura, as you undoubtedly know, is such an essential part and extension of Victor's life. It really was a partnership, not only in marriage, but a partnership in how they lived in the community, as well as their interest in research and care and dedication to other people, and especially migrants in the Kennett Square community where they ended up living. And Laura's talking about many facets. Laura was everything from a docent at the Longwood Gardens, the famous Longwood Gardens near Kennett Square, to a nutrition counselor for migrant women. And gosh, I'm talking on the long list. And she did care with elderly, visiting the elderly during her time in the community. She was really the outreach worker of the two of them, and helped, I think, it helped integrate them both into a community that drew tremendous trust and respect, and enabled them, and especially Victor, to do the research that they did. Well, I first knew Victor when he arrived at IUP, Indiana, Pennsylvania. I can't say it. It's such an awkward, still title. IUP, we do it as, in a beloved way. But thanks to the recruitment of Miriam and Tom that brought him there all the way from the West Coast at University of California, Santa Barbara, where they had all been in graduate school together, to the northeast near Pittsburgh, which it's okay to say, and I think it's evident among some of us here, it was a very Anglo-white community, university and community. And Victor adapted and shared and was very present as himself throughout his whole time there. I smile and remembers because when he arrived with great fanfare, he ended up in an office that used to be a book closet, but without any muttering or complaints, as was his style throughout his time there. I got to know him then first through as a colleague in an anthropology sociology department, and as he got more involved in research grants and other academic activities, he ended up joining a small research center that we had based there called the Mid-Atlantic Addiction Research and Training Institute that a colleague, Bob Ackerman, had founded. And so we spent a lot of time there sharing and wondering about research, writing grants, and how to get money, as well as, produce respectable and published research. But I think the best part of my relationship with Victor was that, the friendship that we had. I grew up near Kennett Square, which was their home base in southeast Pennsylvania, and I had a family there, so I would 2 or 3 times a year or more go visit my family, and part of my family was Victor and Laura, nearby Kennett Square. So I got to really learn a lot about Kennett Square, which only on the surface I knew about growing up, as well, and that was kind of I think the most instructive part of our relationship. But I think I can give testimony to the depth of our bond as friends in our annual February pilgrimage to Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania, which was only about 40 miles or so from IUP. We would get out faithfully at 4 o'clock in the morning and drive through the countryside up to this little, I was almost said dinky town, that's not fair. It's famous town where Punxsutawney Phil resides, and join in the celebration with several thousand people to hear on Groundhog Day what his prognostication would be. Usually, I can assure you, it was flawed. But, and I think for Victor, it was a much of an anthropological outcome or adventure, to observe these heathen rituals that contrasted to the Day of the Dead celebrations in Mexico. But I think what I thought I'd just sort of illustrate some of the setting that Victor was in, that he so beautifully negotiated and mastered and made, enabled the research that he did. Kennett Square was, about 50 miles west of, I'm going to have to look at a note here or two, west of Philadelphia. And it's what's interesting about it is just what a layered community it is, a rural community, sort of just outside the suburbs of Philadelphia. But, you know, it has a staunch group of Quakers that founded the community back in the late 1700s. Then, you know, the Blue Bloods also, and the horse farm owners, as well as a number of new residents who are migrating out of the Philly suburbs for a more rural setting. And then the Latinos started to move in there about 50 years ago to take the place of Italians, who were the first farm workers of the time. And as they moved in, they ended up sort of changing the complexion of what was just a quaint downtown area to also an expanding arena of apartments and trailer complexes around the old downtown to house the many migrants that eventually made up about 40% of the 6,000 people that are the residents there. But it is a town, I should say, of corporative owners of mushroom farms, the individual family owners, a few Latinos own small workhouses, as well as union and non-union workers, and a staunch Catholic center around the Lady of Guadalupe, did you say it right? The Lady of Guadalupe Cathedral, as well as the Quakers that were very active there. And Victor somehow sort of became trusted, respected, and involved in all those sectors. He could move with it rather than get caught up in one faction, one faction or arena or the other. So he was able to see things as a social fabric, rather than compartmentalized. And I think that was really attributed to as much his character as it was, and its manner as it was his methodology. It wasn't a matter of technique. It was really a soulful thing. There was, and I think you'll hear this over and over and know this in experience, there was, he had such an open and caring heart that enabled him to see people as they were beyond the surface of things. And that made for a connection that was trusting and open and sharing. There was a recent book out by David Brooks, who's a famous commentary and author, that I thought really characterized Victor's approach. That was much more than just a methodology. It was called How to Know a Person Through Listening and Empathy. And it was called The Art of Seeing Others Deeply. And I thought that really, just that title itself, as well as what David was writing about, was how Victor approached all the arenas he was in, whether it was with students, whether it was at the university, whether it was in the villages of Mexico, or in this multi-layered arena which we call Kennett Square. Kennett Square, I hope you know this, I shouldn't have to bring this up, was the mushroom capital of the world, and also the home of the best mushroom soup in the universe, which I can attest to. Anyhow, I just smile with amusement at that great characterization. From there, Victor and I would spend time together at lunch or afternoon breaks, sort of reflecting on some of his work, and I would ask him questions about what he was learning and sharing, and he would first have an espresso coffee in one of those demi-tasse, and then and he chugged that down just as well as he did chomping on hot peppers, just. Anybody grimace like I do when I think of that? Okay. No, in a very thoughtful and reflective way. He shared so many insights that probably things that you are all very well familiar with, but things that really at the time to me, sort of stand down and break through the oversimplified, overgeneralized headlines about migrant workers in particular. But here's some of the things I jotted down came from my memory. Migrants tend to have deep ties to their home country that often prompt transnational migration, going back and forth between the two countries, which was something he and Laura very much explored over the years. And that's so overlooked in social policy, as he pointed out, especially in the visa system, the farm worker visa system. And then the drug cartels have so infiltrated even the small communities of Central America, or Central Mexico in particular, as they are that's as much a driver of migration as local poverty and opportunity elsewhere. They're also a contributor to migration is the heavy drug use of Americans that fuel the cartels and make life in Mexico dangerous and corrupt. That has to be addressed, not just the cartels. And then immigration has to make provisions for migrant families to help stabilize farm worker camps that are otherwise single men that are very socially isolated. So much of the alcohol abuse amongst migrant workers that Victor and Laura also studied is linked to the social isolation of these farm workers and the lack of the social buffers that they left behind in their village life. Alcohol treatment needs to adopt cultural factors like accommodating the juramentos pledges in the Catholic Church, the promises to the saints that they would change their behavior, and the supports and restraints of village festival life in Mexico. So you see, it was always the big picture and how people's individual lives would fit into, but weren't consumed by what was around them. And collecting all-important census data, as Victor did in a couple census time, requires at least a supplemental ethnographic approach over a traditional door-to-door survey, perceived as threatening by most migrants. The latter also misses the living and residential patterns that exist amongst migrant communities. An individual may actually go back and forth between multiple residences and family, friends, or whatever. And then last but not least, and this is sort of something I think that we're all increasingly aware of, but again, it's so lost in our stereotype conversations about the Hispanic community, the importance of waking to the diversity of the so-called Hispanic population that is too commonly overgeneralized. The differences by country of origin, assimilation, education, language facility, family ties, religion, ethnicity, and of course, what Victor taught about the Hispanic diaspora. Just a naive sociologist that I was, just learning intense about the difference between Tex-Mex people who supposedly spoke English and the more recent immigrants that came to the country. Yet they very easily all got categorized into, that's the Hispanic population that's going to vote this way and that way, and we need to cater to them in a certain way. Well, I think what stands out to me is not only how Victor moved with such humility and integrity, but I'd also say it really was a kind of grace, wouldn't you? A calm grace. I get all excited and concerned about trying to negotiate the university, as my friends know well here. And Victor just seemed to sort of slide through it, as I think we'll hear more about as we talk here. I think it was really something that came from his heart, and his being, rather than, again, through just academic or anthropological training. And that's been a real lesson for me throughout. I saw him that way work through the many layers challenges of the university administration, different departments, different offices, all that have their own special needs and obligations and outlook, just as he did in in Kennett Square. I saw him work with students, who we'll hear more about. It's the diversity of students that he was able to embrace and accommodate, even amidst his really challenging research work going on and this traveling that went with that. And he always was able to listen, and smile, and acknowledge and understand whoever he was with, much in that way that came in that title that I read about. I guess where I end up is that example, not just the research, but that example enabled the research, but also was such an inspiration and I think a prod to many of us, and reminded at least me how I could and should be better. And so I guess the best tribute I could leave for Victor is, Victor, I strive and hope to just be more like him. Gracias.
I was proud of her, but she is my niece. And she went to IUP as an undergraduate student, did a master's in sociology there at Victor's urging, and then went to her real home, which was a PhD program in anthropology. So I'm Alex Heckert.
And I'm Karina Heckert, and we do have a PowerPoint. Microphone. The PowerPoint is mostly to keep us on track, to remember what we want to say, and to give you all something to look at besides us. Yes, so we're going to talk about lessons we learned from Dr. Garcia's mentoring legacy. We are both in different ways products of his mentorship. So as Alex mentioned, I was an undergraduate student and then a master's student at IUP. And as an anthropology major, I first had some classes with Dr. Garcia. I'll admit I wasn't the best undergraduate student. I was busy with lots of things as an undergraduate student, but luckily I think he saw some potential in me. I was this, hillbilly from southern Appalachia, but he saw something there. He saw that I cared about social justice. And I always felt very encouraged by him. And so after I finished my undergraduate degree, I was kind of like, I don't know what I want to do. And he was one of the people who convinced me, you can do a master's in sociology, get some research experience, use that as a stepping stone to figure things out. And that's what I did. So both Alex and Dr. Garcia encouraged me to do that. And even though I was doing my master's in sociology, he served as my thesis chair in sociology, even though he was an anthropologist, and he did so gracefully. And I learned a lot about how to be a mentor myself to the students that I have now through how he mentored me. Did you want to do that?
Oh, I don't know if I have anything to say. We're keeping this really informal, and we're just going to go back and forth. But yeah, you were one of many students that he served as that figure for. So if he saw a student that had a spark, it didn't matter, he would figure out a way to help them. And if sending them to like a public health program, when we had an undergraduate public health program, if that was the right thing to do for them, then he would do that. He wasn't just like, we're trying to grab a student for anthro or for myself. It was about what was best for the student. That was always what was on his mind. And I think he taught me a lot about mentorship through the sort of co-mentorship of you, because I was on the thesis committee. And Victor showed me how you can do like a sort of a full range of mentorship of the student. It's not just about the intellectual. It's about figuring out what their career trajectory is going to be, what's best for them, things like that. So I don't know if that contributed at all to what you said. I'm ADHD, so things just come out. So I apologize.
That's why we have a PowerPoint.
That's why we have a PowerPoint.
But so when we were deciding how we wanted to do this presentation, we things that we thought back to was this beautiful online memorial that Dr. Gonzalez has, where colleagues, former students have just posted beautiful things. And so throughout this, we have brought in some quotes from that online memorial. And we wanted to start with an excerpt because we thought this really just captured many things about Dr. Garcia's mentoring. And this is from Becky Shankovich, a former IUP student. Dr. Victor Garcia was a mentor, father figure, and guide to many people, including myself. He poured kindness, care, and patience into his students and helped us grow into better people. Dr. Garcia was one of the most influential people in my life. He showed me a world of possibilities that I, as a child of immigrants, had never imagined for myself. And he steered me toward a career in public service. He gave me a job, my first job outside of retail and food service. Most importantly, he believed in me and taught me how to believe in myself and how to care for others. I am forever grateful for the gifts he gave me. And so as we read through these posts, we were thinking, okay, well, what did these posts tell us about why Dr. Garcia was an exceptional mentor? And we started out thinking, okay, well, what's the mentoring literature tell us about what makes a good mentor? And we looked through that and we're like, this is dumb, it's too generic. Dr. Garcia was never generic. So we came up with our own themes, doing our qualitative analysis, the themes that emerged from the online memorial. And so what we identified was he's just a very genuine person. He wanted the best for others, and he taught students how to use anthropology to help others, not just for a career in anthropology, but again, a career in public service, careers in public health. He also understood that mentoring was not limited to academics or career. We're going to talk about each of these things a little more through stories that we saw from the ways he mentored students. And then he also approached mentoring from the long-term perspective and understood, his mentoring had ripple effects. Maybe he didn't always see it, but, and again, we'll return to that, what the ripple effects of his mentoring were. So Alex, I'll let you start with the
All right, okay. IUP is not an R1 institute. It doesn't have the kind of infrastructure for research support that R1 universities have. And Steve you were on the RI board and you're a dean now, so you may not want to hear me say that, but it doesn't really have the best support. Victor was sort of an instrumental person, I think, on campus in terms of mentoring other faculty in the research endeavor. So he was so humble. You mentioned the word humility and his graciousness. I had just written down graciousness right before you said grace. He had a graciousness and a grace about him and humility and integrity. So he would never come and say, okay, like another faculty member asked me to help them with their grant. I would find out from other places. And so I don't even know how many faculty he helped at IUP prepare their grants, write their grants. There was nothing in it for him. He wasn't going to be a co-PI. It was just about, I'm trying to help these people around campus. And he did so much of that people didn't see. And Hilario was a faculty member in Soch, and when we brought him for the interview, I made sure that he got to meet Victor. After Hilario left, he said, you're going to hire him. So I didn't have a choice in what my vote was going to be for this new sociology faculty member. Victor had already instructed me that I had to vote for Hilario. And he helped Hilario with a grant up in northwest Pennsylvania. But Hilario had been trained as a demographer at Texas A&M, and even though he did a mixed methods dissertation, he had less experience in qualitative research, obviously, than Victor. And so Victor mentored him through the whole process. And you talk about, I think maybe you did or maybe you didn't, we did earlier, building relationships was so important to Victor in every domain of his life, but especially like in research, it's important to build relationships first. And he taught that to Hilario. So Hilario, if you haven't read Hilario's full sort of statement on the memorial page, I encourage you to do it. It's just a beautiful statement. After I read Hilario's, I said, I'm not writing one, because I can't capture who Victor is the way that Hilario did. So Dr. Garcia embodied everything beautiful about being Chicano and being a good person. In South Texas, we would say that Dr. Garcia, go ahead and say it.
trae su corazón en las manos.
C. He carried his, I was actually born in Honduras, but I don't speak Spanish because I left when I was 3 years old. He carried his heart in his hands. This means that he was open about his emotions and intentions and kind-hearted. Dr. Garcia's moral compass always pulled to do the right thing. So he is a tremendous inspiration for Hilario. And I think, Laura, you told me that when he would get frustrated with Hilario, you would just remind him about Hilario's background and how important his mentorship was. So that's what Victor told me. So is that accurate? Did I capture that? Yeah. So, but he did that for so many faculty. And then the opioid initiative at Marty, that was Dr. Garcia's idea. So we had a tremendous opioid crisis in the rural counties in western Pennsylvania. And so Eric Lauber, Dr. Lauber, was trained as an experimental psychologist at the University of Michigan. So how do you think his qualitative research skills were? Okay, not strong. That was supposed to be a laugh line, by the way. And I was trained as a quantitative sociologist, like demographer as well. So Victor had some real heavy lifting to do in terms of mentorship. So he actually put together the interview guide and just mentored the whole process. And we had 2 junior faculty members of sociology that he was a great mentor for in terms of doing this whole project where we interviewed 50 sort of professionals and 50 people who used in the area. And then we ended up interviewing parents of young adults that had addiction issues, many of whom died. Those were some of the toughest interviews I've ever done. But he mentored this experimental psychologist, this quantitative sociologist, and 2 junior faculty on how to really do good qualitative research. So is that okay? Go ahead. You're up. Okay. Was there anything else I was supposed to say there?
No, you're good. So I conducted my first independent research under Dr. Garcia's supervision, and so my master's thesis. And, you know, the thing he really instilled in me about that work wasn't the research methods, it wasn't the data analysis, it was the relationship building. The idea that, you know, if you want to do good research, it's about building strong relationships first. And that will ultimately make for better research, but it also makes for just being a better human and doing anthropology for the right reasons. And so, you know, I can't say I've always lived up to this goal of, you know, wanting to help people in ways that I could, but I've always striven to do that. And so I remember, you know, when I was doing my dissertation research later in Bolivia, when experience, you know, I just remember thinking, okay, what would Dr. Garcia tell me to do? Because I wasn't in a situation where I could like just seek out advice. I was like, in my head, what would Dr. Garcia do? So the situation was, you know, I was working on how people engage with and fall out of care for HIV in Bolivia in terms of the global health programs that exist. And early on in my research, one of the women that I met, I just met her in the waiting area. She approached me with lots and lots and lots of questions. I guess she thought I knew something. I don't know why she thought I would be the one to know things. But I quickly realized she felt very lost and very overwhelmed. And she had just come out of this meeting with a psychologist where the psychologist had told her, okay, you've tested positive for HIV, you need to tell your partner. And she's given like no support on like how to actually do this. But for some reason she felt like she could tell me this. But I was like, okay, she's telling me her story. I have an obligation here now. What would Dr. Garcia do? So I started thinking about, okay, what are the systems of support that I know about that I can help connect her with? And I started explaining to her where she could go for like peer support groups, where different things are available. And she just looked overwhelmed and confused. So my next thing was like, okay, I'll get on a bus and take you there and introduce you to the right people. And you know, it wasn't a big deal because like I knew where these things were at that point. This is a woman who traveled an hour from you know, a satellite city to a major city. She had no idea where things were. So it's a very simple act, but you know, Dr. Garcia being in my head reminding me, like, these are the simple acts that can make a big difference for the people that you are working with, I think it's just a lesson that I've taken with me in terms of any research that I've done.
Yeah, I think I wrote down, when we talked about relationships were more important than the research.
Yes.
And I think that was always the case with him. And I don't think that's always the case with scholars. I've heard the term drive-by research when we were doing intimate partner violence research, and that was not Victor at all. He became part of the community. So, is it your turn? My turn.
It's your turn.
I'm feeling the pressure.
About the mentoring.
Mentoring
Beyond
students. I
academics.
think you want to go to
Oh, yeah.
next slide. So you want to say her name properly?
Estefania Alba Rodriguez posted in the online memorial, he gave me my first college job, which may seem small, but helped me afford each semester to eventually graduate. In great part, I was able to go to medical school because of him.
Yeah, that's just one of many, many students that he helped at IUP. I would say that for a number of years, maybe 15 to 20 years, he probably recruited the majority of Latino students, Latina students at IUP.
From Kennett Square.
A lot of them from Kennett Square, he did that for so long, but he gave them a safe place. He gave them a home away from home. He was the person that pulled them aside, helped them out, encouraged them. But he also, we had a colleague that would say high standards but high support. He never lowered his standards for what they should accomplish. But always with the highest level of support. And he did that for so many students, but it wasn't just Latino students. It was, what did you call yourself, a Southern Appalachia?
Hillbilly from Southern Appalachia.
Hillbilly from Southern Appalachia. You know she's from Appalachia. She says Appalachia as opposed to Appalachia. So he did that for all kinds of students. And after you left Marty, we were moved to Straight Hall. I guess you were in Straight for a while.
Yeah.
The Straight Hall became sort of this hangout for CALSA and Latino students to basically have that home away from home. So when the graduate school is still one of our offices, or two of our offices, he was not happy with Steve, just so you know. I can just give you a personal example. I'll get emotional on two accounts because I'm not really grieved properly. So he took care of my son. Because my son he was born early, he has ADHD, LD, ASD, and we never knew how things were going to go in the classroom. He did make it through college and everything because he's so smart, but things get in the way. And Victor would say he's a great student. He has the dysgraphia, so he couldn't spell. Victor never took off for spelling. He knew that he wasn't going to spell. He also knew that his sentences weren't always going to have the best grammatical structure. But he knew that Kyle was smart, and he would pull me inside and said, he's really smart. When he talks in class, it's always a great contribution, and the students really listen to what he has to say. So he did that for Kyle, he did that for lots of students. So he looked and saw what was good in the students and what they could accomplish. And it wasn't just, say your name again? Just your first name?
Yanira?
Oh, is that another quote we have? Okay. All right. I have that written down here. When I shared the financial hardships I faced in paying for my education, Dr. Garcia offered me a work-study opportunity as his research assistant in Marty. This opportunity not only helped me support myself financially, but also provided me with invaluable skills and inspired my passion for public health. Motivated by his example, I even changed my degree, aspiring to use my education to support my community just as he had. His office door was always open, whether I needed advice or just someone to talk to. One moment that stands out is when I told him about the unbearable heat in my apartment and how I couldn't afford a window air conditioning unit. Without hesitation, Dr. Garcia offered me an extra unit he had, a kind gesture that eased both my physical discomfort and financial stress. His thoughtfulness had a bigger impact than he may have realized. It allowed me to focus on my studies and succeed. Well, that was typical of Victor Lares. If a student needed some kind of assistance, whether it was a job, whether it was a material thing like that. And we were going to talk about his mentorship of Lisa later, but Lisa was an undergraduate, master's student, a PhD student at IUP. He gave her his Jeep, Grand Jeep Cherokee, because she had no car and she was just struggling so bad. And y'all gave that to her in a gracious way, and that's the kind of thing that Victor did. Not many faculty give their cars away to their students. I have a couple of beaters that I could give away. So, yeah.
And then, a final piece of Dr. Garcia's mentoring style is he approached mentoring from the long-term perspective, the same way he did his research. And I don't know if he always really recognized the ripple effects that his mentorship would have. Because, those are things that come years and years later. So, just an example of this. One of the things that he forced me to do when I was a master's student, I say forced, I would have never done this without some prompting, was apply for the National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellowship program, which is, getting one of those is very high status, and, a student coming from IUP is typically not going to have a high chance of receiving one of these. And he knew that. But what that experience did for me, I did not get it, by the way, but what that experience did for me was it, for the first time, forced me to actually write a fellowship application, which was a very important experience later on for things that would come later. And years later, I did end up getting a senior researcher grant from the National Science Foundation. And on my third try applying for that grant. But getting that NSF award, the first step to that was a decade before trying to apply for the graduate research fellowship through the NSF and figuring out this is how you tackle an NSF proposal. This is things reviewers are looking for. And as we've all already mentioned, Dr. Garcia mentored many students from many different backgrounds. But he was especially passionate about mentoring Latino and Latina students. And, for me, again, I was the hillbilly from Southern Appalachia, but he also mentored me. But years later, I now work at a Hispanic serving institution. I've been there over a decade. I've mentored dozens of students. And these students that I've mentored and am mentoring are also a part of his legacy. One of the students is here with us today, Melissa Castaneda.
Hello.
She's presenting later at 3:30 if anybody wants to watch her. But she doesn't know it, but she's also a part of Dr. Garcia's mentoring legacy. So Dr. Garcia is your anthropological grandfather. And these ripple effects of his mentoring, they're also evident in the memorial post. So another former student, Yanira Cintura Lopez, she wrote, Dr. Garcia also helped shape my future success in ways I never could have anticipated. While at IUP, he introduced me to a former student and mentee of his. He drove several students, including me, to visit the Latino Community Center in Pittsburgh. The center was founded by this former student to support the local Latino community. I was immediately inspired by her journey as a Latina in higher education, as well as her dedication and passion for serving our community. After graduating, I moved to Pittsburgh to pursue my master's degree. She offered me an internship that played a key role in launching my career.
Yeah, there could be hundreds of those kinds of statements from former students that we just picked a few, and not all of them posted, probably not all of them knew to post. And then something we want to talk about is he continued working, after he retired, up to the time that he passed away. And I mentioned the student that he gave the Grand Jeep Cherokee to, she had some rough times in her life, so she was a non-traditional student, did her undergraduate degree in anthropology. He said, go do the master's in sociology, because she wasn't in a position to go off somewhere at that time in her life to go somewhere else for graduate school. So she did a master's in our program, and Victor was on her committee, not the chair, but on the committee. And he said, go do the PhD in administration and leadership studies. And so she did that. And I would think that she was his last dissertation, Laura. But he would have treatment, and then he told me brain fog is real. He said, some people tell you brain fog's not real when you're being treated. He said, no, it's real. So he would be like really, really hurting and under the weather. And then he would gather the reserves to read another draft of her results and things like that. So I was the de jure, I had a political science degree, by law, her dissertation chair, but he was de facto, in fact, her dissertation chair. And I think it was one of his goals. He said, I'm going to get her through. And she did finish, and would not have finished, I think, without Victor's friendship, companionship. Your friendship with Lisa made a difference, but like just reading drafts would, he could probably barely sit up at times. So that's the kind of person he was. He didn't have to do that. And he got her through.
Yes, so any final thoughts?
Is that enough? I would say I had two mentors at IUP. One of them was Ed. He mentored me in the grant world. I think you actually mentored Victor as well in the grant world. So I want to give some justice to the ripple effect. Because your work with Victor also rippled. So you guys had a mutual mentorship, I think, relationship. But after you left, Victor was the director of Marty and appointed me director of training. He didn't want anything to do with the trainings, so he made me do that with Crystal. And then after a year, he appointed me the associate director. And we basically talked about all the decisions together. And he always listened, and he said, "Yeah, Alex, you have some good ideas." But whenever he didn't follow my ideas and followed his ideas, he was always right. So I had to learn humility. Okay? And so we would talk about, what we should do with Marty and that kind of stuff. So he actually mentored me in sort of that side of things as well, not just another way. So, but I guess that's it. That's all, folks.
The first half of the session, we're really talking about Victor as the human that we knew and our colleague and friend. And the second half of the session, which will start at 11:15, will focus more on the research that Victor accomplished in collaboration with many other scholars throughout his career. So I'm Miriam Chaikin, I'm the chair of this session, and Tom, my husband, so when I'm talking about our experiences with Victor, I'm speaking, but it's really coming from both of us. Tom Connolly and I were classmates of Victor's in graduate school, colleagues of his at IUP, and friends through many decades. So I wanted to talk about the ways in which, as I was reflecting on this, the ways in which my life was parallel to Victor's life in so many ways. That started when we were both in graduate school. We both worked as applied anthropologists through our entire career. We became colleagues at IUP. We had to adjust to life in Appalachia. I'm not going to say Appalachia, Appalachia. We were in the hills of Western Pennsylvania, which is its own unique culture and ecosystem. And so we had to figure out how to navigate all of that. And for many years, not only were we friends and collaborators and colleagues, we lived across the street from each other. And actually, Steve Hoban, who's going to be the first speaker in the second session, and Victor and I and Tom lived like 3 houses apart from each other. So we were connected by many different webs that brought our lives together. And then also we're all alumni of UC Santa Barbara, and we maintain connections with our grad school colleagues in many ways, some of whom are here at this conference and we're looking forward to seeing. So let me start first by talking about what our life at UC Santa Barbara did and how that shaped us all. I came with an undergraduate degree from Arizona State. Tom came with an undergraduate history degree from Case Western Reserve and a graduate master's degree from Arizona State. And Victor came with an undergraduate degree, and then he had I believe a master's in Chicano studies from Stanford? Stanford, I think that's right. So we all came to UC Santa Barbara to do the PhD together. Tom and I were a couple of years ahead of Victor, so we never actually were in classes with him. But we had some of the shared experiences. So at the time we were students there, this was in the 1970s, way back No, actually, by the time Victor started, it would have probably been 1980. UC Santa Barbara was one of the top departments in anthropology at that time. We had some faculty who were really luminaries in the discipline, including Albert Spalding and Elman Service and Brian Fagan and Juan Vicente Palermo. And probably the most famous of our anthropologist mentors was Paul Bohannon, who was at the time the president of the American Anthropological Association and one of the most prolific scholars in anthropology in the first half of the 20th century. He taught a course that shaped all of us, a course on professionalism. And it was a course that helped us understand how we were supposed to navigate the world as anthropologists. It was partly about research methods and partly about how you publish, but it was about how you see the world as an anthropologist and how you navigate the world as an anthropologist and what obligations you have to the world because you are an anthropologist. And I think that Bohannon's influence, he was not on any of our dissertation committees, but I think he had a big influence on all of us as his former students. And none of us could write as prolifically as he did. I asked him one day, what's the secret to doing all of your writing? And he said, the secret is to apply the seat of your pants to the seat of the chair. And I have remembered that on many, many occasions. But one of the things our faculty mentors did for us is that they modeled this life of extremely hard work. All of these faculty were very productive, doing different things, but everybody worked really, really hard, and they demanded the best of us, they expected the best of us, and they supported us to make sure we could give our best. Lots of graduate schools talk about, people talk about their horror stories of graduate school, their battle scars from graduate school. And there was certainly some of that. I mean, we all had many moments of doubt, of self-doubt, but by and large, the professors supported us, they built us up, they helped us find resources. In the same way you're talking about Victor finding resources for students, that was our experience as well. I remember Tom and I came back from 2 years in the Philippines. We walked into our mentor's office, David Brokenshaw. He was South African British, and he said with his great British accent, "Right, you're back. Do you have a job? Do you have a place to live?" Those are the first words out of his mouth. And so this kind of support for your professional and personal development was something we saw as students when we were all in this program together. And I think one of the things that happened is that it allowed each of us as graduate students to support each other. There were times where we all had a crisis of confidence. And when you were down and you were thinking, this is it, I'm quitting, I've got to get out of here, this is not going to work for me, one of your other classmates would hoist you up and say, you can do this, you're going to get through this, let's keep going. And one of the other things our faculty mentors did is that they modeled this collaboration and a word that we seem to need in our lives today, civility. These were people who were very different from each other, and yet they always found a way to demonstrate respect for each other, even if they knew nothing about what the other colleague was doing. These were people who came from very, very different backgrounds, and yet they still managed to have these very positive relationships. They never had arguments in front of students. They never spoke ill of any other faculty members. And that, I think is increasingly rare. We see this incivility creeping into so many aspects of our lives. But at UC Santa Barbara, we were shown how to behave as professional anthropologists. And I think that's something we all carried forward in our lives. Another way in which we are parallel is that Victor and Tom and I, especially Victor and I, have always had a very applied focus in our research. Now, we're at the applied anthropology meeting, so presumably everyone has some idea what that means. But to put this in context, I have a former colleague who shall remain nameless, and the institution shall remain nameless, but he thought that what we were doing as applied anthropologists was worthless. We were not doing real anthropology, real science, and therefore our work was just, diminished. It was definitely not something to be proud of, and our publications didn't mean anything. This is a man whose specialty was the teeth of apes from the Miocene era, and he wrote a lot about teeth. That's real anthropology. So there's always been this tension in our discipline between the ivory tower anthropologists, or if such a thing ever existed, and applied anthropology. And Victor and I and Tom all had a very applied focus throughout our entire career. And that's really important, I think, because Santa Barbara permitted us to head in that direction, even though most of the faculty who mentored us weren't necessarily applied anthropologists in and of themselves. And it also was valued by IUP. And not all universities would give credit for the kind of research that we did. Research that was community engaged and participatory. These are things that some universities would consider not highbrow enough. But at IUP, this was considered very appropriate. We were a teaching university embedded in a very poor rural area of the world, and we had an obligation to the communities that surrounded us and the students that were brought to us. And so, understanding the issues, in Victor's case, understanding the issues of the experience of the migrant, the Latino migrant to Pennsylvania, today that's more timely than ever as we see the brutality of ICE trying to grab people and take them off the street and haul them away for having the audacity to simply be doing a good job and doing a job that none of our fellow Americans want to do. So Victor was, really innovative in his work of looking at the migrant communities both as enclaves where they've landed in the United States, but also the sending communities that they came from. And some of his research was in Mexico in those sending communities, and having that binational focus. I think at the time that he was doing that research, that was kind of innovative and unique. And I'm guessing Roland is going to talk more about that in the second half of the session. Looking at the process of people moving back and forth across the border when it was somewhat more porous than it is today. I think another important thing, and both our previous speakers all of our previous speakers have alluded to this, is looking for cultural solutions to problems that our communities are facing. Recognizing that sometimes you need to throw money at it, sometimes you need to throw technology at a problem, but it has to be something that fits within the cultural context. And this is something that, as an anthropologist, Victor understood very well. And that means working with local groups. So you talked about the Lady of Guadalupe and the way he was embedded in the religious communities. I think that's something that we try to do as well in the work that our applied work. Then I wanted to talk about the ways in which our lives paralleled in our professional work as professors at IUP. So he came, you were right in saying that Tom and I were instrumental in helping recruit him. We said, there's this guy, he's working on his dissertation, and if we don't hire him before he finishes his dissertation, he's going to be snatched up like a hot potato. So we persuaded, we had a very progressive, visionary provost at the time, and she heard about Victor and said, absolutely, we've got to hire this guy. So he came to visit, and we hired him a couple years after Tom and I joined the faculty, And he was still writing his dissertation, and in some ways that was a terrible thing to do to him, to say you have to finish your dissertation and teach full-time. I think we gave him a partial course release in the first year. But that's a testimony to his hard work, that he was able to finish writing his dissertation while taking on a full-time teaching load at a teaching university where the number of classes you teach is more than what you do in an R1 or a big research university. So over the course of our 20 years together, 20 plus years together in the department, we had a lot of things that we accomplished that I think were very important. One is we became a standalone anthropology department. There was a little drama involved in that, but in the long run, I think it was a really productive move for both the sociologists and the anthropologists. And we developed, within anthropology, this was in the early 1990s, this was like 30 years ago that we did this. We developed tracks in the undergraduate major, so that you got an undergraduate degree in anthropology, but you could focus the courses that you took in certain areas of interest. So some of the students were, they wanted to be archaeologists, and they still had to take some cultural anthropology and some of what we would call the four fields, get exposure to the whole broad range of anthropology, but they could focus or specialize in one area. And we had a track in applied anthropology that Victor and I helped design, so that students who wanted to go into public health or public service, working for federal or state agencies, they were getting the kinds of training in research methods, in analysis, statistics, that they would need to be working in an applied setting. And I think that was we did that pretty early on, and I think that was a pretty important innovation in the curriculum that we developed at IUP. We also developed area studies classes, which is not particularly surprising in anthropology, but we were in Appalachia. Our students had very sheltered backgrounds. Many students, I would say the overwhelming majority of our students had never been on an airplane. We were 1 hour from Pittsburgh. We had students who'd never been to Pittsburgh. And many of our students came from, as our visionary provost, Hilda Richards, that I was mentioning, she said, she nailed it exactly, that our students came from very tight enclaves, very small communities. Some of them were minority students from inner city Philadelphia, but they'd only ever been in that little community in inner city Philadelphia. Others were white students from rural communities, but they'd only ever been in those little rural communities. So whether they were African American or white, and I noticed I didn't say Latino because in those days we had 0 Latino students and 0 Native American and almost 0 Asian students. They all came from very sheltered backgrounds in some ways. And so we developed these area studies classes. Tom taught Africa and Southeast Asia. Victor taught a course on Latin America. Later, when Francis Allard joined the department, he taught a course on China. And so we were trying to expose students to cultures from other parts of the world that they hadn't had any possibility of learning about. We pushed our students to do things that were important for their career development, such as presenting at sessions at the applied anthropology meetings, which I am very happy to hear a group of students from IUP are here they'll be doing that later today or tomorrow? Today. Yeah, later today. We pushed our students to get experiences in internships and field experiences, and I know Victor took some students to the field so that they had that first-hand experience. Our students would gain confidence because of these experiences and realize that they did have abilities, they had marketable skills. And we would support them in taking them on these field trips to various places, bringing them to professional meetings, especially when they were held in Washington, D.C., which was only a few hours away. We would always take them to the meetings. Many of our students have gone on to have successful careers. and in public health, in human resources, in business management, in education, in lots of different fields. And I think whether or not they would call themselves anthropologists, their anthropology training prepared them well for the challenges of the modern workforce. And we tried to emulate that collegiality among the faculty that I think we all experienced as graduate students. I was teaching at one point, I was teaching in an interdisciplinary class in the Honors College that I team taught with someone from psychology and someone from biology. Both departments that were known to have some contentious relationships. And so I was talking to my colleagues in biology and psychology, and we were talking about how to manage something, and I said, well, you know, in our department, we do this, this, and this, you know, when we're trying to work out these issues. And the biologist turned to me and he said, oh, you anthropologists, you just have a love fest going on over there. And that was very true. I mean, we really cared about each other as colleagues and supported each other in ways that were important for us as individuals. So when our students, one of the ways we supported our students, and this is a part of the mentoring, I'm not sure the students always appreciated at the moment, but we developed something called the Junior Year Review. So at the beginning of the junior year, each student was asked to fill out this form that was basically saying, where are you going from here? And we looked at their transcript, and the faculty sat down as a group, and we talked about each individual student of how have they been performing, could they be doing better, where should we be trying to guide them, what should they be doing next? And then the faculty advisor would meet with the student and say, you know, have you been thinking about an internship? What are you doing to arrange for an internship next summer? What are you doing to arrange for some practical experience? And this was, I think, viewed by the university as a model for holistic, formative advising that was helped increase the success of our students. I mean, part of the reason that they went off and did these internships and then got these jobs. I'll give you an example. One of them is a student that both Victor and I had, Laura Kramer, who was from a very, very small town in Poconos, and she was interested in international development. So I used some networks that I had at Save the Children, and, oh no, sorry, different agency. I had a friend who was working for an international development organization called Counterpart International in Washington, D.C., and I arranged to get Laura an internship with that agency, but she was very poor. She had no money. So we found her a dorm room to live in at American University for the summer, and she got a waitressing job at night. So she worked from 8 to 5 in this international development agency, and then waitressed so she could afford to live in Washington, D.C. from like 6 o'clock to 11 o'clock at night. And she did that all summer long in order to make this internship happen. When she graduated, she went to work for Counterpart International, and within a couple of years was managing $50 million international development grants. She then went on to get a master's degree at Cornell in international development. And I'm very proud to say she is now one of the senior climate scientists for an international agricultural research center based in Kenya. She finished a PhD from an international university, and this was all being launched by the experience she had at IUP. And I know that she would say that her experiences at IUP prepared her for this lifetime career. One of the experiences was learning how to drive a stick shift, which Tom had to teach these kids all how to drive stick shift because none of them knew how to do that. And they all knew that as an anthropologist, you're going to have to drive a stick shift at some point in the field. So when the students come back, you know, sometimes we see them years later, and they will say things like, wow, doing that internship, I realized that I was just as well prepared as the students who were working in this organization from some Ivy League school. We had students who would go on to graduate school, and they would say, you know, I I had more training in method and theory than the other students from these very fancy universities. I was sure I was going to be like the weakest graduate student, but actually I'm a contender. And I think many of our students realized that that support and guidance that we provided helped get them into this position where they had opportunities. And of course, one of the other ways in which Victor was parallel is that we lived in this small town in Appalachia. We were friends who lived on the same street. And our friendship deepened in our years of working together in Pennsylvania. So we lived 2 doors down from each other. He was across the street and 3 houses over. So we could see each other's houses from our front steps. We lived about 2 blocks from a grocery store called the Giant Eagle. And that was where we would all walk over to buy our groceries. And one of the things that we complained about was that they didn't have any of the foods that Victor and I grew up in Phoenix. They didn't carry any of the foods we were used to eating. They didn't have chilies, they didn't have cilantro, they didn't have tortillas. I mean, this was 1990. So we kept asking them to start stocking these exotic ingredients. And I remember one day buying, I went in one day and there was a person in the produce department who looked very official with a clipboard. And I said, do you work in the produce department? He said, I'm the regional produce manager. So we had a conversation about poblano chilies and cilantro. And suddenly they started stocking it in the store. And so I was like, Victor, they have cilantro at Giant Eagle. And I remember checking out one day and I commented to the person as I was checking out, oh, you have cilantro now, I'm really happy about that. And the checker said, the clerk said, yeah, there's some lady who keeps nagging us about these weird vegetables. So we finally decided to stock them. And I'm like, I wonder who that weird lady could be. And I think Victor and I both had a reputation. When we would check out at Giant Eagle, they'd say, what, no weird vegetables today? So we helped introduce some foods that the rest of the community was happy to have, but it's because we kept asking for them.
We have a Chipotle now.
Oh.
Your work is really...
All right. Moved beyond Taco Bell, you know. Yeah, the people thought Taco Bell was the Mexican restaurant when it first opened. There was a conference on campus, and Victor had laryngitis. And he was supposed to read a paper, and he literally couldn't get a sound out. So he had written the paper, and he asked me if I would read his paper. It had a lot of Spanish in it. So I read it over and over again so I could try and do justice to the pronunciation of the Spanish words. And I remember standing up in this big auditorium where I was going to be speaking on his behalf. And they introduced Victor Garcia, not knowing that he was not actually going to be reading the paper. And I stood up there and I said, obviously I'm not Victor Garcia. Imagine someone who is tall, ER, and drink a martini on Thursday nights for many years. Tom pretended that ER was too highbrow for him and it was just a soap opera. It was sort of a soap opera. But he would walk in and out of the living room while we were watching this, pretending like he wasn't paying attention to the storyline. But this was a guilty pleasure that Victor and I enjoyed for many years of our Thursday night martini sessions. At one point when Victor was dealing with an illness and was feeling kind of shaky about it, he just moved in with us. You know, that was part of being part of a community. So he stayed with us for several weeks while he was getting through this illness and moving beyond. And that was a kind of friendship that we had. Even though we sometimes teased him, and Tom had a particular way of pulling his leg. When we first arrived in Pennsylvania, now Victor and I were both coming from a warm climate, but Tom grew up in Cleveland, so he knew what winter was going to be like. And Tom said to Victor, you know, you need to wear a knit hat to keep your head warm. And Victor's like, no, because those are gang signifiers if you're wearing a knit hat. You can't. But within a few months, he was wearing the knit hat. And at the same time, when he first moved he bought a house, the house across the street from us. The first year, he lived in another place. But he bought the house, and then Tom told him, well, you know, you can't turn the furnace on until October 15th. The governor has this energy savings rules. And so if they see smoke coming out of your chimney, the police will come and arrest you. And so we didn't think Victor would believe this, but he did. And so he didn't turn the furnace on. And he would come into the office bundled up in all of his clothing, trying to stay warm. And finally we broke down and said, Victor, just turn the furnace on. It's cold. It's below freezing. You need to turn the furnace on. One of the other things we shared, we were both used to growing up in a place where you could see the horizon. You know, Laura was commenting on, you know, that they're so flat here. We're used to being able to see, with not having trees everywhere, being able to see the blue sky as far as you can see. And so one of the other things that Victor and I shared is that we learned when we would drive around in the hills of Pennsylvania, we both got motion sickness. So this was one of the occupational hazards of living in that part of the country. When Victor first arrived, he came from California, where he'd grown up in the Central Valley, which is, you know, a very politicized place for a Latinx person to be coming from. He had done a master's degree in Chicano studies, and I remember he talked to me about telling his father, self-identifying as a Chicano, and his father was very angry about this because he thought it meant that he was up to no good. You know, using that label was saying that you were kind of a rebel or radical. And when he arrived in Pennsylvania, there were no Latinx people from anywhere in the Latin diaspora. So people didn't know what he was. They didn't have a label for him. And he went and got his hair cut at a little local barber shop, and the barber was talking to him, and he's like, Garcia, huh? Garcia, that's a funny Italian name. I've never heard that Italian name before. And Victor said there was a certain relief as he was getting used to this new community. There was a certain relief in not having people have preconceived ideas about who he was and what he stood for. That he could just be Victor and carve his own way in the world. And I thought about that on many occasions when we lived in places where we lived in Africa for many years. And as a white person, you can never be anonymous for even 10 seconds when you're the only white people in the community. You're constantly under scrutiny, and people are always aware of what you're doing and where you are. And so for Victor to come to this small town in Pennsylvania, in some ways it gave him a chance to kind of create the identity for himself that I think he wanted to create. It gave him a little breathing space in a way that I think he had not anticipated. The people that we worked with in graduate school and as our colleagues remained our lifelong friends. I know when Victor was dealing with his cancer, he became closer to Brian Haley, who was one of our classmates from Santa Barbara, who was going through parallel kinds of challenges in his life. And when Victor passed, we heard the news from Sarah Nicias, who was one of our colleagues. And he was the first among us to go, the first of this group of very tight-knit faculty. It hit us all really hard to lose Victor as a friend and as a colleague. We had another colleague, Anya Olenfale, who had passed away earlier, but Anya was in her mid-80s when she died, and so it wasn't terribly surprising, and she'd been ill for a very long time. So when Victor passed, it really hit us like a ton of bricks. This was the first among us to go. And even though he's not part of us anymore, it made us realize we have a limited amount of time to be together. And so we, anthropology colleagues who've all retired, Sarah and Phil, and Tom and me, and Larry Kirkman, we have made a point of being more in touch with each other since Victor died, because we all love each other, and we need to be reminded of the very special bond that we all shared, and the very special legacy that we all helped create together. And all I can say is that Victor's memory is a blessing. So we have a lot of time. We have 20 minutes or so that we can just hang out and chat, and we will take a break so that we start the second session at 11:15, so that we're on time. But I wanted to open this up for anybody who had anything they wanted to say, share, or questions.
I can give a metaphor for Victor. You can call him the comet, because when he was walking, there'd be a trail of students. So it was the comet's tail would be these students that he was mentoring. So that's one of the metaphors that I think. First time I saw Victor, you introduced me to him at the ATM at S&T Bank. And he tall, handsome, right, as you were saying.
Tall, dark, and handsome.
But his hair was wild, and he just looked so, just out of it. And then I found out he was working on his dissertation, because you guys hired him ADD, and no wonder he looked a little frantic. But that was the first time I met him, was you introduced me at the ATM machine. So that was one of my memories. But he became a brother to me, as I told you. You got nothing? Anybody else?
Well, I emphasize again Victor's extraordinary contribution to my understanding, so many people's understanding the field of the lives of immigrants in particular. So often, this is my awakening, but we talk with a lot of what seems to be appreciation or understanding or even deriding, immigrants without appreciating what they actually do. Victor certainly helped me and many others to see what they actually do, what the lives are really like, and to be able to appreciate that. How many of you have been to the mushroom farms? Well, thank you, Victor. Laura.
Oh, Laura just said, okay.
They are long cinder block buildings that are about 2 stories high with multiple wooden shelves stacked with mushroom manure and the mushrooms growing on them. There are no lights, constant moisture, so everything's very, very slippery. And the migrant workers would come in almost like a miner, with, miner helmet with a big light on their forehead to be able to see the mushrooms, climbing up and down these very slippery and dangerous scaffoldings with knives on tied to their fingers, little curved knives, going throwing the mushrooms in the bags. These were long 12-hour shifts sometimes. But that's all so I could have mushroom soup. Anyhow, I just, out of that experience with Victor, who was able to move so easily inside and outside of the mushroom farms, as well as be with the corporate and union representatives of the community, I felt that I really came with a whole different sense of the lives of these people, as well as what they actually do. So, thanks, Victor.
Yeah, one thing I admired about him was staying calm with bureaucracy. As one of my mentors said, bureaucrat and administrivia. He was going to write a book with that title. But Victor was able to move seamlessly, but he wasn't like a shrinking violet. I don't know what cliche to use, because he knew when to work within the institution, but also he knew when he should try to change the institution. And I think that's a really sort of a balancing act that not everybody does, because some people go like complete revolutionary, and other people like just get co-opted by the institution. And I think that he was so good at navigating that at all levels, and that served his students, and that served his department and his programs, because that was always the goal. It wasn't about serving himself, it was about serving others. But I think that that was a trait, a characteristic that I really admired about him. So I think that's an important sort of component of who he was. Yeah.
Very selfless, I would say.
Anybody else have? Yo, Amanda, come on up. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm Amanda Fulham at IUP, and your comments about his institutional savvy resonated with me, because one of the first times I met Victor as a new faculty member just coming out of completing my dissertation, 2009, we had lunch in the Oak Room, and he began mentoring me essentially, and one of the first things he shared with me was insight on how to recognize and navigate institutional bureaucracy, because we were on the heels of the 2008 economic crisis. Atwater was on his way out. There was a lot of change and drama and crisis happening at IUP. And he sat me down and he said, listen, there's always going to be crisis. That it's a constant, not a sudden thing that comes and goes. And that crisis can be made to shift and consolidate institutional power and practices. So step back, take a bigger view and a long view on it, and then use that to kind of recognize what's happening and to navigate those processes in a savvy way. And that really stuck with me, because he was absolutely right. I think we've been in a crisis every year since I started working at IUP in 2009, and it helped me put it into perspective and be pragmatic about building relationships and having the long view on what we want to accomplish programmatically.
Yeah, he had a lot of wisdom about those kinds of issues that he would bring me to.
Yeah.
He mentored me in my application for tenure and promotion. And I said, Victor, can I just use your articles? That's just a joke, sorry. But I basically modeled my tenure and promotion applications after his. And so he was always gracious in that regard. Whatever he could do to sort of help you and promote you, he would do that. So.
And I happen to know, I wasn't supposed to know,
Where is the microphone?
the tenure and promotion system at IUP is an unusual one, and that you know, of course, you're evaluated by your department and your chair, but there's a university-wide committee that reviews all promotion applications. And they rank the applications 1 through 50, you know, and the provost will decide how far down on the list they can go, afford to go in terms of promoting people. Victor was #1 each time he went up for promotion. So that tells you something about the importance of the research that he was doing, and just the prolific scholarship that he was able to produce while still teaching a heavy load, while still mentoring students and fellow faculty, while still doing extraordinary university service and community service. He worked really, really hard and accomplished a lot, which is why we're all here today.
Example for us all.
I was thinking about one of our walks around the tracks when he would come back to Indiana after he retired. And I was the chair of my department for 18 years, and I'm still alive. And I have a case of academic PTSD, was my joke. But Victor was so kind and compassionate, because we would walk and much longer than he'd intended to. And I would just sort of rant and rave, and he would just listen carefully. Probably didn't care, right? No, he didn't care because he cared about me, but I would hand, and then he'd finally say, okay, all right, well, it's time to move on. And so then we would talk about things that were more productive. But he gave me that space to be able to have a person that could understand what I went through, because he knew the players and everything that was going on. So that was really, really important to me, to help me. That was therapeutic for me, and he didn't have to do that either. So, yeah. Don't ever serve as chair for more than like 6 years. How long were you chair, Marion?
I was chair 6 years at IUP, 6 years in
Okay.
New Mexico, and dean for 6 years.
Oh my
So-
gosh. You need to walk around the track with Victor.
The pandemic did me in.
That's okay.
The second half of our session about the visionary Victor Garcia. Many of you were here for the first half of our presentations, which focused, I think, a lot on the Victor as the person that we knew and loved. And the second half is going to focus somewhat more on the research and advocacy work that Victor did and the legacy that he has left in that field. I'm Miriam Chaikin. I have the honor of organizing this session and bringing together a lot of people from different parts of the world who all have one thing in common, and that Victor was part of our lives, and we are very grateful and fortunate for that. So the second session, the first paper that was scheduled was by Jessica Locke, who is a former student of Victor's, and unfortunately she had a family emergency and will not be able to be with us today, but we're going to have a replacement speaker who I'll introduce in just a moment. I would ask that everybody please silence your phones so that we don't have errant ringing, in part because we're video recording this session, so there will be an enduring tribute to Victor that his widow, Laura Gonzalez, has arranged. So if you're someone who would prefer not to be videotaped and you're in the audience, try and sit on that side, and you'll probably be out of the camera shot. Most of the video will be focusing on the front of the room. The other reason we're doing this is that we're hoping that many people who were part of Victor's life would be interested in contributing to the Victor Garcia Memorial Enhancement Fund at Indiana University in Pennsylvania. So we have flyers here, which we will make sure everyone gets a copy of. These are to help ensure that Victor's legacy lives on at IUP, and there's a QR code where you can just make a secure donation to this fund. So we'll make sure we distribute these at the end of the session. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to start this first session by having some words from Steve Hoven. Steve is the Dean of the College of Natural Sciences and Math at Indiana University of Pennsylvania, and anthropology is housed in that college. Steve also knew Victor as a colleague. He was a faculty member in geoscience at the time we were all in anthropology. And Steve, my husband Tom, and I, and Victor all lived on the same block, Grant Street, walkable to the university. So we were 3 houses away from each other for many, many years. So we have lots of connections, and it's very appropriate that Steve launches the second half with some comments about Victor.
Thank you, Mariam, and thank you for all that are joining us. The morning, or the first session was quite special, very touching to me to remember some of the things that I'd forgotten about Victor and the influence he had on people, but also very touching to learn new things about Victor that I hadn't heard before. So I appreciate all of that from the presenters. As the dean of the college where Victor would have been housed, I can tell you I never had the pleasure of being his dean. I came after he had retired from IUP. He's a very well accomplished scholar, researcher, grantsman, mentor, and I think we'll hear more about that as we go today. I would have loved to have had that kind of a faculty member to call my own and take credit for, as deans tend to do. But I do want to say something about the Victor that I knew as a faculty member. As Miriam mentioned, I've been at IUP for 32 years now. I came as a geologist, and many of you are Victor's academic children or academic grandchildren. I was sort of his academic stepbrother. As a geologist coming in with the anthropologists, they became my family in many ways, and I was very touched to be part of that. But I was first introduced to Victor, I think, actually at one of Miriam's dinner parties, and got to know him that way. But my real introduction to Victor as a scholar came when I wrote my first grant at IUP and was turned down from the National Science Foundation. And the grant director at the time encouraged me to go talk to somebody who's been successful with various federal grants, and that, no surprise to anyone here, that Victor was that person that they sent me to. And Victor, as was mentioned before, often did things very quietly, and he sat down with me, we had coffee in his office, and he read through my grant, gave me some advice, very good advice. The advice was to be more human about it. I was, I think, a pretty good scientist, and I wrote a grant that was very scientific, and his advice to me was to let people know the impact this grant will have on the community as a whole of scientists, as well as what it means for the university and what you can do as an undergraduate instructor at a predominantly undergraduate institution. And so I did that, and I think much in large part due to Victor's advice, that second time was successful. So when you talk about the ripple effect of Victor, I think I'm one of those people that benefited from his impact on campus. Many of the students that we'll hear from today went on to pursue graduate degrees in medical careers and research professions, and carry forward the confidence and inspiration that Victor helped instill in them. And when you speak of his former students, and there are many of them, you quickly realize that Victor's greatest legacy may not be the research or the publications, but it's the scientists and professionals that he helped shape. Victor strongly believed that excellence in research should and could happen at institutions where teaching is central to the mission. And I think many of the people that were associated in Victor's circle believed in the same mission, and that teaching and research are not opposed to each other, but that could work together to produce and should work together to produce students for the future of the fields. So the many contributions of Victor, has been mentioned before, is that he was awarded the Distinguished University Professor Award at IUP, the highest honor of all the faculty there. He was very well deserving of that from his publication record, from his grantsmanship, from his mentoring, and all the different aspects that you've heard about this morning and we'll hear about later on today. But I think if you ask Victor he didn't care about those titles. He was very humble. He didn't care about the recognition. What he cared about was the legacy that he moved on with the students and the faculty that he was colleagued with. And so, as we hear the impact that Victor's had, I think that's probably the biggest legacy that he's left for us, and the thing that I think most of us will remember him for is that he touched us in ways that most of us, I don't even think, realized at the time, and that will live on. After the morning session, I was chatting with a couple of the speakers, and I had mentioned that in some ways it's really hard to believe that Victor's gone. And then somebody mentioned that in many ways, this morning session, I think today, as you'll hear, is that he's still with us. And it's really sweet to know that. So thank you all for being here. With that very brief introduction, I just want to thank you for everything that you've meant to both Laura and his colleagues, as well as for what you do as a scientist. Thanks.
So the first presentation in this second session, this afternoon session, is co-authored by Roland Moore and Ana Pagano, and Roland will be our presenter today. The title is Centering Culture to Support Recovery from Substance Use Disorders Across the U.S.-Mexico Border, Heartfelt Insights by Victor Q. Garcia.
Thanks. If I could present from here, that way I can move the slides forward. Thanks. Well, thank you everyone for coming today. And by way of introduction, I wanted to say on behalf of my co-author, Dr. Anna Pagano, who's at the American Society of Addiction Medicine.
Microphone.
Oh
You have
my
to
gosh.
hold it closer.
How is that?
That's good.
Oh, good. Thanks. So I wanted to say that we've had, for decades, productive and enjoyable discussions with Victor. And in my case, these meetings started in the late 1990s after Dr. Jan Howard of the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism had matched Victor with my colleague, Dr. Genevieve Ames, and myself at the Pacific Institute for Research and Evaluation, or PIRE. And our role was to serve as grant writing mentors for him, so we in a way teamed up with Ed. And as is often the case in such matchups, we, the mentors, learned more from Victor than the other way around. But we did encourage him to persist and reapply, and that's what he did. He actually, as we heard, had figured out how the game works, and he mastered it. This is a screenshot from the NIH report that captures some of the grants that he was the principal investigator of. He worked on other grants as well as a co-PI, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So credit squarely belongs to Victor for his long-term and very successful career in applying for and receiving NIH grants to support his research on alcohol and other drug use among transnational Latino labor migrants. He figured out very early on another secret to success, which is, although we're often trained to be lone wolf anthropologists, team science is the way to go for these large NIH projects. And his work exemplifies that with lots of co-authors and lots of collaboration. And he was extraordinarily productive, in part because he figured that out early on. At SFAA and AAA AAA meetings, Victor and I would regularly confer, but it was usually more fun than just work stuff. Sometimes we would venture out to places like Latino strongholds like Pilsen and Chicago. We went out there with former NIH project officer Suzanne Roberts, who some of you know. And eventually, as you will hear, Victor played a pivotal role in research on grassroots substance use recovery programs, or NXOs, with my colleague Anna. And our hope had been that he would join us on a more permanent basis as a senior research scientist at PIRE once he retired from the university. And he did that, but as you know, it didn't permit that relationship for long. So the basic premise of our paper today is that Dr. Victor Garcia possessed a remarkable, charismatic talent in gaining the trust of many Latinos who were seeking to achieve recovery from alcohol and other drug use. And over the past several decades, and with noteworthy NIH support, he advanced and tested hypotheses concerning distinct cultural levers for healing. For instance, he explored annexos, which are residential mutual support groups that were developed in Mexico, but took on different forms through transnational networks to the US and to many other countries. And another recovery modality that he documented before his untimely passing was, as Ed mentioned, the transnational juramento, or sobriety pledges to Our Lady of Guadalupe. And through his caring interactions with US-Mexico migrants, Victor made monumental contributions to the medical anthropology of substance use recovery in Latin America and the Latin American diaspora. So early on in his career, Victor became fascinated with the emergent theme of problem drinking among transnational migrants who were employed in southeastern Pennsylvania's vast mushroom industry. So here's what we were hearing about earlier. This is what it looks like. Pretty intense and, for most of us, grim working conditions, but ones in which Latino mushroom farmers made a profound contribution and niche. Victor defined problem drinking as binge drinking accompanied by consequences such as DUIs or fighting. And he identified numerous contextual factors, as Ed mentioned, exacerbating these problems, especially difficult accommodations, social isolation, and persistent pressure from peers to engage in problem drinking. And key variables that he highlighted were the tenuous legal status of the workers meant that they tended to work far from their families in quite isolated labor camps with lengthy work hours. With his wife, Laura, Victor expanded his research to investigate the experience of transnational labor migrants who returned to their communities of origin, and also investigating, even if they hadn't returned, what was going on with their families in the sending country and communities. And when these migrants returned to their communities of origin in Mexico, drinking did take place, but it was subject to the normal social controls of family and community that kept behavior a little more orderly, you could say. And based on these connected research projects, Victor, Laura, and colleagues theorized a binational social ecology model of alcohol and drug use, and hypothesized relationships among the variables shifting as individuals move between Mexico, the United States, and back. And in-depth studies of individuals who were deeply religious led to Victor's focus on that particular form of faith-based treatment embedded in Mexican culture, the juramento. It's a pledge of abstinence made more frequently in early stages of progression to problem drinking. And let me quote from one of his papers on the subject, as he put it far more eloquently than I could. To grasp how the juramento intrinsically works and how it could result in secondary and tertiary prevention, you must understand the sacred pledge and dyadic relationship entered with Our Lady of Guadalupe. As a 34-year-old immigrant makes clear, she is at the center of the juramento. And this 34-year-old said, you keep the pledge because you made it to the Virgin. And for Mexicans and Catholics, the Virgin is like your mother. And not keeping a promise to the Virgin is like not keeping a promise to your mother. You value and respect your mother. This is the power of the juramento, where you're truly committed to changing and have strength in your faith. Victor and his teammates explained the value of juramentos via thick description and detailed case studies of repeated experiences by jurados, those who make the pledge, which led ultimately to Victor's proposed intervention incorporating screening, brief intervention, and referral to treatment, or SBIRT, principles into the juramento process. And this was a novel juxtaposition of a community-defined evidence practice, the juramento, with a Western evidence-based practice, the SBIRT, that deserves testing. In related research, mandas, or prayers on behalf of family members who drink heavily or use drugs, Laura and Victor both worked on this. And in contrast to the juramentos made by a drinker or drug user to abstain from this use, mandas instead represent requests for divine intervention to protect family members from the dangerous substances of drugs and alcohol. And usually the people requesting are the wives and the mothers of their family members who use these substances. Now, in the course of doing substance use research in the sending communities of the transnational labor migrants, Victor identified some gaps in the institutional structures designed to protect human subjects. Following the foundational Belmont report in 1979. And I would say it takes courage to challenge this established framework of human subject protection. But Victor honestly identified that there were cultural gaps when researchers from the United States go to study other countries. Sometimes our bureaucratic structures don't really map that well onto the anthropological experience he suggested that oral consent with a waiver of signed consent may be the most practical as well as the most ethical way to gain the fully aware participation of individuals in research projects without jeopardizing their confidentiality or their legal status. And his conclusions have additional import and implications in such challenging times as we face today. With our colleague Anna Pagano and others, including Juliette Lee, Victor conducted groundbreaking fieldwork on transnational Mexico-U.S. alcohol and drug recovery modalities, including AA fourth and fifth step groups and residential Alcoholics Anonymous programs called Annexos. They're called Annexos because they're recovery homes annexed to an ongoing and independent Alcoholics Anonymous group. Each Annexo had its own director, although they would never identify themselves that way, because someone in long-term recovery from alcohol or other drugs who served as an informal mentor to group members and was in charge of the logistics of managing the Annexo. They didn't see themselves as leaders, but rather peers. The Annexo model comes from Mexico, but is present in many other countries, including the U.S., where Annexos provide essential shelter and support to both first and second generations, and often people you call 1.5 generation, kind of in between, from Mexico and Central America. Annexos in Northern California, where Victor and Anna worked, tended to be all male, but more recently an all-female Annexo was opened. And to quote from their paper on the transnational basis for Annexos, while millions of Americans have benefited from drug addiction treatment, most transitional migrants at risk for SUDs do not have this option. When Latino migrant men seek help for substance use disorders, they encounter individual level barriers such as limited English proficiency, financial constraints, and lack of documentation, and system level barriers such as few Spanish language treatment services, and programs' inability to admit unauthorized immigrants. And as with other health services, Latino migrants' fear of deportation presents a major barrier to accessing substance use disorder treatment. When they're unable to access treatment, Latino migrant men are at high risk for intoxicated driving and long-term health consequences, including cirrhosis. And so to address their need for treatment, Latino migrants throughout the U.S. have created an alternative recovery infrastructure called Annexos, or Grupos 24 Horas, in the U.S. And there's been some adaptation in the U.S. context that differs from Mexico. So a few of the differences that Victor and Anna identified were that in the U.S., Annexos feature voluntary participation due to enforceable restrictions on compulsory internment. There's more freedom to leave the Annexo due to resident status as migrants supporting families in their country of origin. And there's more democratic governance resulting from directors' needs to work outside the Annexo in order to maintain the support of their families in the countries of origin. So when Anna started visiting Annexos, first as a community health worker and then as a researcher, there was no way she could blend in. Why? She's female, non-Latina, and not in recovery from alcohol or drugs. And Anna said, the Annexo members welcomed me to the meetings and events, but I was not confident in my ability to do meaningful research with them until Victor supported and encouraged me. That support led to an R21 NIDA study, and during summers, Victor would come over from visiting his family in Stockton and attend Annexo meetings, events, and interviews with Anna. Sometimes they also just hung out at Annexos and learned about the daily routines, or worked on healthcare and legal referrals for the residents' endless struggles to get basic services. And as the son of first and second generation Mexican immigrants, Victor possessed cultural knowledge that Anna did not. And despite the differences in their life trajectories, Victor related easily to the Annexo members with empathy, humor, and kindness, as we've been hearing. He helped Anna to navigate cultural interactions that she did not always understand and brought immeasurable value to their research relationship with the Annexos. And as Anna said, he was a true mentor who inspired through example Over time, I watched how he interacted with the Anexo men, almost as if they were long-lost cousins. I learned so much by witnessing his exchanges with them. He taught me to ignore my self-consciousness and focus on the human interaction unfolding right in front of me. Anna continued, I remember the first few times I introduced Victor to the Anexo members in Oakland. In one Anexo in particular, I'd been turned away by a skittish Anexo leader. There was a lot of fear and hesitancy among some of those leaders because most Anexo members were undocumented and their landlords often did not know that they were running a recovery house on the property. But when I arrived one day at the Anexo with Victor, we managed to gain the leader's trust, and the leader then welcomed us in. All of a sudden, it was as if we were family. Another time, we were trying to interview an Anexo member who began to present with altered mental status. Victor was able to put him at ease and conclude the interview in a way that preserved the relationship and left the door open for future conversations with him. And towards the end of our Anexo study, we visited Anexos in Los Angeles with the idea of expanding into Southern California. And although that study did not ultimately move forward, Anna said she never would have had the confidence to approach Anexos in LA again without Victor. His gentle wisdom and his mentorship opened up possibilities for collaboration that otherwise would not have existed. To quote again from their research, this study has taught us valuable lessons about what recovery looks like, at least in our field set, when it is constructed by Latino immigrant communities themselves from the bottom up. It also exposed the stark marginality lived by members of this population who are excluded from much needed services. The Anexos are a safety net for a public health safety net that is full of holes. So in a final set of research projects, Victor worked with colleagues to study the spread of opioids, as we heard, in Appalachia, and hoped to use his ethnographic methods to shed light on cultural aspects of the epidemic that could be leveraged to reduce the levels of overdoses. And this would have been a significant contribution to both theory and practice, and we're all the poorer for being unable to learn how he would have resolved these challenges in his particular way. So in conclusion, Victor was a true anthropologist. He approached the world with curiosity and a humble manner that drew others to him. He was a gifted storyteller who conveyed a sense of wonder when recounting episodes from his field work. He became deeply involved with the people and places where he did field work, truly investing in these communities and making an effort to lift others up. He had a rare gift, and his life was an example of simple, precious humanity to those who were lucky enough to cross paths with him. Thank you.
Who was a colleague of Victor's at Indiana University of Pennsylvania. Forgive my Spanish pronunciation, no andaba muerto, andaba de parranda, IUP's Global Health Program and the legacy of Victor Garcia. Thank you, you did great. I live in New Mexico now, so I hear a lot of Spanish.
Some practice. Everybody hear me all right? Thank you very much, and thank you for your kind words. As Miriam mentioned, my name is Abby Adams, and I had the incredible privilege of being the colleague of Victor Garcia for almost a decade. This has two parts. The first part is a discussion of Victor's efforts to establish a global health program at IUP. And the second part is a discussion of the pig roast and I will make connections, that's what anthropology does, the pig roast that we held for his retirement. And so I have a little bit of a photographic journal. I'm also a food scholar, so this does kind of make sense. Well, Victor Garcia's contributions to anthropology, recovery work, IUP, and most importantly, his students are immeasurable. Thanks to his visionary work, IUP now has a vibrant global health program that focuses on improving health and achieving health equity for people worldwide. Victor deeply understood, that the health of the individual is interconnected with the health of others and community. This is one of the many legacies of Victor as IUP's global health program prepares students to challenge health inequality,
by developing critical competencies and ethical awareness. He left IUP with a global health legacy which equips students with the practical and ethical tools to work effectively in local and global healthcare settings, and this was not an easy road to establish the program, and some power brokers did not see the value of such a program. Thanks to Victor's steady guidance and knowledge, being able to read the room, so to speak, we were able to establish the program with, after some time. Through his calm and steady direction, the deep wisdom of the politics of things, we did persevere, I'm happy to say, and were able to establish the Global Health Program in 2016. Many of you work in global health, so you can just confirm your knowledge here, but global health is an important and somewhat newish field which integrates perspectives from diverse disciplines, including public health and, of course, anthropology. It began as a practice more than a field, and its intellectual value lies in its objective to create linkages between global and local health issues, problems, and solutions. Like most all emergent disciplines, global health built upon previous scholarship, such as during the 1960s, scholars began to formally develop international health as an academic field. Scholars like Carl Taylor helped shape early academic programs that looked at health through social, economic, and political perspectives, moving beyond the disease-specific approaches, incorporating people. Shocking, you know? Other scholars like Paul Farmer, Dr. Kim Jim, Michelle Porter, and Arthur Kleinman contribute to its origins. Global health was not and has never been about one person. It grew over time from tropical medicine to international health and finally to our modern global health approaches through the work of many researchers, organizations, and international collaborations. Because global health critically examines the ways in which Western medical techniques and attitudes toward health are disseminated throughout the world, the tensions generated in local cultures by this globalization of health, it provides IUP students with opportunities to engage diverse cultural systems and to be exposed to different models and delivery systems of providing healthcare. Victor understood the importance of such perspectives and articulated to me that he did not want to retire from IUP without establishing this program. Defining global health is a bit of a challenge. Like many things anthropological, it tends to be a little bit all over the place. But an appropriate definition comes from Copeland, who defines global health as, quote, an area of study, research, and practice that places a priority on improving health and achieving health equity for all people worldwide. Health equity necessitates overcoming health disparities associated with underdevelopment and other global forces and barriers to healthcare resulting from restrictive requisites that differ from one nation state to another. Drawing on this definition, we proposed, and by we, I mean myself, Dr. Amanda Poole, and Victor, we proposed an interdisciplinary global health minor designed to equip our students to think critically, to engage health challenges and practices, and of course, the very important ethical and moral foundation to global health endeavors. It was developed to allow students to explore various core principles of global health, such as epidemiology, health interventions, and health systems. Through Victor's steadfast vision, we created 6 tracks within the minor that enable students to specialize in a specific global health arena to develop their scholarship. Those 6 tracks include food, nutrition, and hunger, law, ethics, and policy, environmental justice, disaster, conflict, and displacement, gender, sexuality, and reproductive health, and aging, one that I'm starting to explore myself. The Global Health curriculum introduced IUP students to the environmental, socioeconomic, and political factors that have a bearing on health and healthcare outcomes. The global health legacy of Victor Garcia at IUP lives on. In just a few hours from now, students, excuse me, I've only cried 3 times today. Students from the IUP anthropology program will present their individual research on maternal and infant health access in rural Appalachia. This is a product of Victor's vision. They focus on maternity deserts and barriers to care. A global health program at the university isn't just a niche academic offering, rather it plays a critical role in preparing students to navigate the increasingly interconnected world where health challenges cross borders. It helps students understand that disease and health systems are global, not just local, but they are, of course, very local. You can hear my Western Pennsylvania come out when I say local. Events like the COVID-19 pandemic showed us how quickly a health crisis in one region can affect the entire world. A global health program teaches our students factors like travel, trade, migration. All of these influence the spread of disease and require coordinated response for effectiveness. Global health programs promote health equity. The introduction to global health courses, a core requirement of the program, focuses on disparities between high-income and low-income countries, examining why some populations have limited access to care, clean water, or vaccinations. Students learn to think critically about the social determinants of health, like poverty, education, and infrastructure, and how they shape outcomes across different regions. Significantly, IUP's Global Health Program builds interdisciplinary skills. Global health sits at the interconnection of medicine, public policy, economics, sociology, and the environmental sciences. Students might study epidemiology alongside ethics to analyze how climate change affects disease patterns. This broad training prepares graduates for diverse careers in health as they are trained to see the holism of healthcare and well-being. Victor also recognized the importance of global health training and workforce development. There's a growing demand for professionals who can respond to international health crises, design public health interventions, and manage healthcare systems in diverse cultural settings. IUP's global health programs give students practical experiences through fieldwork, research, and meaningful partnerships with all varieties of healers. It also encourages cultural competencies. Working in global health requires understanding differences in beliefs, tradition, and healthcare practices. Anthropology is perfectly poised to address these questions. In short, IUP's Global Health Program, envisioned by Victor Garcia, equips students with the knowledge, skills, and perspectives needed to address complex health challenges that no single country can solve alone. Importantly, and this is a thread throughout Victor's life and his life well lived, is that global health is about justice and inclusion. The curriculum of the Global Health minor exposes students to important perspectives, increases their awareness of health problems and practices, and provides them with a set of skills to be able to engage the ever-changing world. As with all of Victor's scholarship, there is a concerted effort here to attract and recruit students from underrepresented populations into the program. Now I turn to the pig roast. I renamed the title of my paper to Victor Garcia and Extending the Table. Pig roast, and Victor deeply wanted to have a pig roast to mark his retirement. And so on a sunny day in April of 2022, out at my small farm, we had a pig roast in his honor. And if you've ever attended a pig roast, you know this is not a quick affair. Pig roasts hold a special place in many communities because they bring people together. A whole pig takes hours. I think we were humaning the pit for, I'm going to say 16, 17 hours. Preparing and cooking the whole pig, cutting the wood, digging the pit, tending the fire, seasoning the meat, of course, sprinkles of conversation and laughter, setting the table, and of course, welcoming the guests. This collective effort creates opportunities for conversation, cooperation, and storytelling, strengthening the bonds between neighbors, friends, and family. Beyond the meal itself, the pig roast symbolizes generosity and hospitality, indicative of Victor's life. Sharing a large feast encourages inclusion and reminds people that they are part of something bigger than themselves. Victor's desire to have a pig roast to mark his retirement reflects his deep love of community and togetherness. His celebration built a sense of belonging by turning a simple act, the sharing of food, into a meaningful community tradition. as sacred commensaliity. Pig roasts have been practiced in this geography of New Mexico for generations. Known as matanzas, they have a pre-colonial context where communities ate javelinas, an indigenous New World peccary. I received my PhD from the University of New Mexico. It's wonderful to be back in my old stomping ground. And when I had first moved here, I grew up in Indiana, Pennsylvania, and somehow ended up back there. That's a whole different paper. As a new graduate student many, many moons ago, I remember in the local news, there was a report that a woman from Socorro had lost her pet potbelly pig and went to her neighbor's house looking for her beloved Hamlet. I will never forget the name of the pig, only to find her neighbors roasting it in their backyard. I told this story to Victor and he was heavily amused. And I was going to have an entire part of the paper on Victor's humor, but, and I imagine that Victor was deeply amused by us humans. And the comedian George Carlin said, quote, "It is the quiet ones, the watchful person who has the most poignant insights into the absurdities of humanity." And this was definitely Victor. After the arrival of domesticated pigs with the Spanish conquistadores, and in the days before refrigeration, the slaughter of a fattened hog during fall and winter was a community celebration and a practical way of distributing food. Fun fact, the world's largest matanza happens just 30 miles down the road from here in Belen, New Mexico. This large-scale event, run by the Valencia County Hispano Chamber of Commerce, serves as a celebration and fundraiser with proceeds supporting local student scholarship and community feasts. I'm currently teaching one of my favorite classes, the anthropology of food, and I have used Victor's pig roast as an example of communal commensaliity. They have a saying in food studies, "Tell me what you eat, and I will tell you who you are." I would add to this statement, "Tell me how you eat, and I will tell you who you are." Victor was truly the best of us. He taught us to extend the table in more than just a metaphorical sense. Victor extended the table to include more voices, perspectives, and participants. Extending the table is about expanding who gets included in conversations, decisions, power, and opportunities. It imagines a table where important discussions happen, traditionally within a limited group, and then asking what happens when more chairs are added. Victor added many chairs. At its core, the metaphor highlights inclusion. Instead of keeping decision-making confined to small, often homogeneous groups, extending the table means intentionally inviting people who have been left out, whether because of race, class, gender, geography, or expertise. It's not just about being present, but being heard and valued. It makes for a better meal. A long table brings together different lived experiences, which can reshape how problems are understood. And Victor knew this better than anyone. In fields like global health, including more voices is essential to reveal the needs or barriers that expertise alone might overlook. Of course, there is an ethical dimension, as I mentioned. Extending the table implies a responsibility to include others, not just when it's convenient, but because it is the right thing to do. It pushes against tokenism, simply adding a seat without real influence, and instead calls for meaningful participation. Through the work of his students and the many of us who he influenced academically, Victor continues to this day to extend the table. No andaba muerte, no andaba muerto, andaba de parranda, which translates to he's not dead, he's out partying, or probably more apropos, he's out on a bender. And so I would like to take you, some of you wanted to be at the pig roast and were not able to, so I'll show you the process and the joy that was involved in that. Victor, presente. The title of my paper was inspired by a coffee cup that Victor bequeathed me because he knew of my great addiction to caffeine. And so, no andaba muerto, andaba de parranda. Here we're preparing the pit. we had to order wood, rocks, and I still have that pig because I hope someday to reuse it. Of course, we had to have napales in the pig. Many different fruits. We lathered, I didn't, this is the chair of our, soon-to-be chair of our new department, Ben Ford, and he rubbed the entire pig in a special concoction that included orange juice and other herbs. There were many inappropriate jokes made during the process, as you can imagine, as he was rubbing the pig lovingly. We named her Daisy. Here she goes into the fire. And positioning her to cook, and then tending her from the early evening all the way until the next morning. And then you build a fire upon it, upon the pig. So there's coals underneath and coals on top. There's Victor, who brilliantly decided to use my daughter's giant frisbee to create coals. I don't know if it would have happened without that insight. He's highly adaptive, clearly. There's the fire. And the final product, the pig. She was unwrapped and shared with the masses. Here we are celebrating Victor on the hill. Talking to students, gathering together to celebrate him. And there we are. Thank you to Laura, the Kopchak College of Science and Mathematics, IUP's Department of Ages, and all of Victor's colleagues and students. And there is a QR code if you are so inclined to give to his scholarship to continue to extend the table. Thank you very much.
Our final speaker is Alicia Recruz from the University of North Texas, and she's going to be speaking on transformative inspirational paths in Victor Garcia's applied anthropological life and work. This is going to be our final presentation, formal presentation, but we're going to have plenty of time when she's done to have conversations, tell stories, ask questions. So I invite you to start putting on your thinking cap and thinking about where we would like to go when Alicia is done. So without any further ado, I'll turn this over to Alicia.
Buenos días. Good morning. It is intimidating to be the last one paying homage to Victor Garcia's life and trajectory. Why? It is because my microphone.
Be closer to your mouth.
Closer, okay. It is very intimidating, especially coming the last one. Why? It is because he has left behind such an intriguing anthropological tapestry. This woven fabric was embroidered with distinctive ethnographic, academic, pedagogical, and methodological. Oh, okay, like this.
Very close.
Very close.
Very closer, like this. Much of his visionary contributions to applied anthropology has already been mentioned and highlighted by colleagues participating in this extraordinary session. Thus, I humbly offer this epilogue, hoping that it can contribute to a lively discussion. I need to admit that I struggled to write this presentation, keeping my focus on strictly Victor's work and his applied wisdom, while attempting to escape the current socio-political, national, and international crises rocking our world. But I cannot. Our current social reality is one of the unprecedented use and abuse of power, destruction of norms, erosion of our government and democracy. They are coupled with the rise of authoritarian politics intimately linked to the empowerment of AI technology put at the service of policing and military interventions in their world. I agree with Roberto Gonzalez, who in an editorial piece of the last issue of Human Organization affirms that this current fractured society raises questions about ethics, politics, and practical applications of anthropology. He presents this editorial masterpiece with a powerful admonition. If and when American fascism comes to full fruition, how will you respond? This question has been painfully lodged in my anthropological and existential soul so deeply that the quest for answers has become an obsession. And it has turned itself into a ritualistic exercise trying to bring light and remedies for this fractured reality with all the tools that our current and ancestral encyclopedic anthropological wisdom can provide. So with unbridled appetite, I have plunged into a new reading of Victor's work. My aim at this point is to quench my own thirst for finding ways to maintain our faith and trust in anthropology within the fragmented, chaotic world in which we live. This is the world that Garcia says it is at a conjunction. That is a breaking point of different historical events that makes a new political force. As anthropologists, who do we pivot to adjust and respond within the communities that we work here?
Not here.
As anthropologists, who do we pivot to adjust and respond within the communities that we work with the students we teach, and with the colleagues, our own colleagues? For this presentation, I revisited most of Victor's work. That experience has been very similar to when we reread those master literature pieces that have marked our lives in order to gain new discoveries, lessons, and existential guidance. Before putting into words these kind of revelations, from my recent reading of Victor's production, I should like to share with you the fact that other than his written work, I came to know him through my dear friend and colleague, Laura Gonzalez, his wife and life collaborator. In fact, I would say that most of Victor's scholarship has the signature of the intellectual, theoretical, and methodological marriage. The first time I met Victor was at Casa Angel Paler in Oak Cliff, in Dallas. It is known as the Barrio, being the largest Latino neighborhood in Dallas. My number 3 child was just a baby. With 3 Latino kids and a husband from Guanajuato, he and I were always seeking Mexican community events so our children could feel the unlearned traditions of our gente. It was December, the season of Las Posadas, and Laura's invitation was delightfully accepted. This was despite the chilled cold of North Texas winter and the 1-hour drive with 2 kids and a baby in the back. After walking, stopping at different houses, asking for posada, and receiving champurrada and chocolate, we sought refuge in Casa Palermo. The inside of the house was as crowded as the outside. Groups of students, faculty, members of the community, invited scholars, and other characters composed the house human kaleidoscope. Shelves of books, photographs, papers with genealogies and kinship trees were displayed tastefully around the room, and that made our warm welcome into their home. There I met Victor, engaged in a lively conversation with a student who was showing very proudly his parents his genealogy research project. The house was a field station. Let me pause for a few minutes to explain what I mean. In critical, applied pedagogical and methodological terms, the design, organization, and implementation of field stations is a Mexican anthropological tradition. It considers fieldwork as a professional praxis in both research and in the classroom. This is so in such a way that what empirically is observed in the field is connected to broader research issues. It is also used in theoretical considerations in the classroom discussion and is brought back to the field again. Angel Palerm, founder of this Mexican School of Anthropology, was an advocate of the integration of theory and practice in the beginning, at the very beginning of the student's career. For this purpose, he established the first field station in a town very close to Texcoco in Mexico in 1967. Laura, first in her native Mexico, and then Victor in his native California when he was a student in Santa Barbara, were raised in this tradition. My first encounter at Casa Palerm, Angel Palerm, illuminated my understanding of this interwoven nature of their work in centering and developing field stations. So, going back to my review of Victor's work, Victor's early ethnographic efforts were centered on the Mexican migrant communities, as had been said already, particularly the campesinos, immigrants, and newcomers in California. Laura and Victor met as graduate students in the University of Santa Barbara, California, Santa Barbara, so their anthropological marriage started. In one of his first applied anthropological adventures, Victor's aim was to dismantle the stereotype that newcomers, Mexican farm workers, lacked interest in the political affairs of the US community. And he succeeded in doing so in All Was Not Lost, the political victories of Mexican immigrants in Guadalupe, California, published in 1996. This is an exquisite and ethnographically sophisticated work. Beneath the surface of recommendations for the Census Bureau, that was the client, there is a delicate and meticulous ethnographic work explained in detail within one of the appendix of the study. In my opinion, this early scholarly piece should be a chapter in a textbook of anthropological methods to exemplify how a community study should be done. The curated, artisanry-like ethnographic work reveals the arrimados, migrants who lived in the house of immigrants, kin, and friends due to housing shortages or economic hardships. These arrimados are usually not recorded in the census because they move from one household to another. They are the most vulnerable of all, that is, the most exploited farm workers living in extremely poor, miserable labor conditions. Victor's ethnographic research on transnational Mexican farm workers, particularly in Pennsylvania, in the production and harvest of mushrooms, remains critical in transnational studies. It opened a crucial line of research on the relationship between situational factors, as Roland was explaining, associated to migrant status, like non-traditional living arrangements and extreme isolation, and the problem of drinking. In addition to their cultural dislocation from family and community in their homeland, in the US, fast-paced and physical exertion during the harvest season contribute to migrant stress and anxiety. They are expected to make daily harvest quotas without damaging the mushrooms. Workers also speak of calentura, fever associated with the grueling nature of the harvest, described in physiological terms as low-grade fever, back and neck tension, and sometimes rapid heartbeat. The deep ethnographic understanding of Mexican farm workers, facilitated by the participatory nature of Victor's methodology, leads to revolutionary findings that connect transnational farm workers to binge drinking. And it forces a shift in the paradigm that centers the perception of these problems with drinking away from dysfunctional or pathological behavior and towards systemic constrictions. Within the framework of transnational students, Victor and Laura started a new path in the terrain of transnational social fields that trace migrants and immigrants in their circulation across the border between their Mexican communities and their location in the US. I am referring to the connection between migration and drug use. For me, this groundbreaking contribution is is a great contribution to applied anthropology, for it applies meticulous ethnographic work to a binational social ecology model of drug use among transnational migrants in the United States and Mexico. This ethnographic research unveils another critical dimension of applied work with transnational migration and drug use. That is the presence of drug cartels, forcing change on both participatory field strategies and methodological strategies to deal with violence and sometimes increased violence in the field. This was a kind of premonition and research precautionary preamble which became a permanent item in the anthropological equation of the analysis of displacement. I'm referring to violence. My own work on asylum seekers, started in 2014, revolved around the concatenated types of violence that forces people to leave their homes and their communities. Among those are the tactics used by drug cartels, which are some of the cruelest and most traumatic carved into the heart and minds of migrants and people who are seeking asylum. In my reading of Victor's work, in conversation with Laura's, for me, the pedagogical dimension of their work becomes quite relevant within our current disjunction. As already pointed out in the introduction, Laura was raised in the field station tradition created by Angel Palermo at the Iberoamericana University in Mexico in the 60s. This model was transferred to his son, Juan Vicente Palermo, when he became the director of the Center for Chicano Studies at the University of Santa Barbara in California. It was based on the creation of student-professors teams working together on research projects including field visits to nearby communities. As anthropology graduate students in Santa Barbara, both Laura and Victor participated in these fieldwork initiatives, and they transferred this concept to Texas with UT Dallas University in 1999. The goal was to use ethnography and the field station model at the predominantly Latino neighborhood, Oak Cliff, as a strategy to make anthropology and the university more relevant to Latino students. They received a 4-year FIPSE grant entitled an Ethnographic and Social Science Model, community-based, with the end goal of recruiting and retaining Latino students, which facilitated the installation of the field station in Oak Cliff. This project included the organization of the course Culture Studies, Oak Cliff Fiesta, focused on the teaching of ethnography and the value of Latino local culture. The course included a variety of guest speakers, general discussions on lessons and assignments, workshops on the ethnographic methods, and field exercises around the neighborhood. The location of these activities was the field station house that also presented community leaders and visiting scholars who lived in the house. Most of the students were Latino, some of them from the barrio, from Oak Cliff, but no active members in their own community. This context reminds us of Paulo Freire's pedagogy of the oppressed as a way to construct knowledge collectively. It involves a process that engages consciousness, feelings, desires, and wills of the learners. It is about generating processes and experiences of dialogue and conversations for the sake of creating new knowledge. And I will add here Freire's words. No one knows everything, nor does anyone know nothing. No one educates anyone. No one educates themselves alone. Humans educate each other, mediated by the world. This should be read as who teaches learns, and who learns teaches. Knowing is not a mere intellectual task, but primarily a political practice. On June 2000, the field station Angel Palermo of Dallas, Texas, was officially inaugurated. And it became a community center, research center, and a classroom so students could develop their research protocols, recruit informants, conduct interviews, articles, books, photographs, maps, videos, and hundreds of genealogies were produced and displayed to be used by students and community members. Students presented their ethnographies, and guest speakers from Australia, Mexico, Chicago, Pennsylvania also presented their own work. Parents learned about funding, how to find funding education opportunities for their children. Students learned to craft genealogies of their own families, a tremendously empowering strategy. Time does not allow me to describe the socially transformative effect this pedagogical model for articulating research and teaching can promote in today's reality. The question is not whether higher education can be saved in the current fragmented world, but rather whether we are able to build a response and imagine the next step. In that process, the extraordinary dexterity that Victor and Laura crafted in the design and development of field stations might ignite our anthropological imagination today. Thank you.
So instead of looking at communities and saying these are their problems and they have all these deficits, it's saying these are the strengths within these communities, and we can use these cultural practices and these institutions to find solutions to the problems that do exist. For example, substance use. And I think that's a very, very anthropological way of looking at social change. The second thing, I started to write my notes here, what did I write? the strength of qualitative research methods, that to answer these questions and to do this inquiry, you can't just do a one-off survey and walk away. This requires really being embedded in communities, really learning about communities, being participatory within those communities, and again, I think that's a huge strength of what we do in anthropology. And I say all this at a time when we are being overwhelmed by extremely negative news, extremely scary news about the erosion of civility, democracy, justice within our own society. And I think we need to hold on to these tools of resilience in order to get through this era that we're living through right now. Because I think that we are all, I wake up with a knot in my stomach every day, and I suspect I'm not the only one in this room. It also strikes me that this may be AI-proof. This is something that AI can't do, but we can do. We as anthropologists can do this. And I think these are things that, this is a little moment of celebration, I think. Not just about Victor, but about the power of what we do as cultural anthropologists. And I think we should be proud of ourselves. So, yay us.
Hi everyone, I'm Marisol. I'm a current senior at the Indiana University of Pennsylvania. Now, unfortunately, I never got the chance to work with Dr. Garcia or, get to meet him even. However, my dad's a mushroom worker at Southern Chester County. So I don't know if this was mentioned in the first part of the session. I unfortunately missed the morning session. But outside of all the connections that Dr. Garcia made there, he made connections with local students and mentors in the high schools, in the local high schools. And through those connections, I had a great mentor in high school who made an amazing connection with Dr. Garcia and continues sending students to IUP. And I don't think I would be here with that connection, at least not in IUP. It's nice to know that next generation of legacy continues to impact students, and I thought it was important to mention that as well. So, thank you.
Nicole is now trying to decide between Boston University or Penn State for her graduate. Boston College. Sorry, Boston College.
Boston College.
Hi, I'm a former student of Victor's, and we were close friends in the last couple of decades of his life. And one thing I would like to share a little bit is Victor's sense of humor, which is part of how we became fast friends. He had a very dry and deadpan sense, and those of you who know, got that. And he could be quite a prankster sometimes. One of the first times that I had this turned on myself was when he told my then professor, Dr. Gould, who would keep an eye on me when we went to Washington, D.C. I don't know if you remember that, but so I was talking to him on the phone shortly before the pig roast, and just catching up. And he tells me that he's got to go dig a pit. At this point, I know nothing about this. What are you talking about? He says, yeah, so I said I wanted a pig roast when they asked me for what I wanted for my retirement. I didn't think they were going to take me seriously. And I said, this is your fault. This is your punishment for telling people things that they don't know when you're joking. But also, as this went on, I know that he was a person who didn't always love the spotlight, but it was really meaningful for him to have that, even if at first that wasn't necessarily what he thought he wanted.
No. She stood up.
No, sorry, I was sitting back down, sorry.
Don't has to say something.
Come on, Tommy.
Well, I've been trying to avoid this.
Whole pack of
think the thing that I remember about Victor the most when he first came.
Microphone. Yeah. Take a bite out of it.
When he first came is that he seemed to me to be very innocent. And this was when he was just out of graduate school and not too far advanced in age. That he, Miriam didn't truly explain the event that she talked about before, that he was visiting us often in those early days because we had this connection from Santa Barbara, and he was a little uncertain about things at IUP. And I'm the one who told him as he moved into his house that there was a law in Indiana that you couldn't turn your heat on until October 15th. And if you know Indiana, that's almost the beginning of winter there. And I had no idea that he would believe me. But he did. And this is this innocence that I first saw in him. And I think this began to decline as he became more mature and an academic. For the first, I think, maybe 6 weeks that he was living there, even though it was getting cold, he did not use his heat because I warned him that he was going to get a ticket. And to me, this is the thing that I remember. He's this accomplished scholar that everybody here knows, and this very successful academic. But he really didn't start out that way. He was a very simple, kind, decent guy, but over time, he became this
Did
wonderful.
you ask for forgiveness?
He never
Knew.
He knew.
It's an annexo for pranksters.
But he accepted it as a joke, and didn't hold it against me. Perhaps you would not. You've been living here, and I think this gets to the sort of the gentle nature that Victor had, that he was able to tolerate this type of behavior from me.
It was Victor's pure heart that he
Yes,
forgave you.
But I have felt very bad about it.
Well, then I guess I'm going to wrap up, and thank you all for coming. Thank you for being part of this important tribute to this man that we all knew and loved. And the world's a better place for him having been here. And leaving a legacy with all of you. His intellectual children, grandchildren, and now go off and make some great grandchildren for him. So. Thank you.